Good afternoon. So thank you for the music. I asked for Cake by the Ocean, explicit. They didn't give it to me. Then I said, well, why not the Tiger Rag? So I didn't get it either. So, well, anyway, I'll tell you what the Tiger Rag is. If you're not from South Carolina, this is the official theme of Clemson University football team. And I can tell you something, that on the football field, we do our rivals. But when it comes to working together for what's good for South Carolina, we do it with grace and poise. And then Clemson and USC are the best friends, as well as MUSC. So you all talk about workforce development. So I'm also the department chair at Clemson University in bioengineering. And then we'd like to thank our students for being here. And then I can guarantee you that if you need a workforce, we'll work with you to make sure that they do have the skill sets, the communication, as well as the creative thinking that you need to make sure that your businesses are the best. Because after all, South Carolina is the best state in the United States and on this side of the ocean. So that said, I do have an example for you to talk about workforce development. And then a few years ago, Ivy Hall, it stands for Harry Thomas Hall IV, Ivy came to my office, and then he graduated with a degree in ceramic engineering from Clemson University, a BS degree, and Ivy said, I would like to do research. So he joined bioengineering. A couple years later, he graduated with an MS degree in bioengineering, went in the workforce, and became one of the most accoladed Clemson alumni ever in the medical device industry. So Ivy now is the global president for trauma, craniomaxillofacial, and animal health at DePuy Synthes, which is Johnson & Johnson. So Ivy has had a brilliant career making devices, developing them from graduate school on to even now his role. And then actually today he told me that this was his passion, to make things. So all of you here do have this passion. You have a product in mind. So after joining KNC Nash, and then follow on at Synthes, Ivy has graduated from Penn State University with an MBA, and then followed on with Harvard Business School, for which he's an alumni of, and then he also did business leadership out there. Ivy is also a lecturer at Wharton School of Business School at UPenn. So he is a very strong alumni, as you can say. When you're South Carolina, you want to come back. Hopefully one of you one day can hire Ivy. It might be expensive. So he also serves on the CUF board at Clemson University. He's on our board in bioengineering at Clemson University. And then I serve in many fashions as a mentor, a recruiter, and also a motivator for students to join the workforce in the medical device industry. So please help me welcome Ivy Hall to the stage for him to give you an overview of how the big one. We talked about pharma all morning. Now let's talk about medical devices. Ivy.
So good afternoon. So it's truly a pleasure to be here, and I do appreciate the time slot. I think finishing up right after break is fantastic. Everybody's sugared up and hydrated and ready to go. And so that way we can really dig into some medical device discussions. So it's really, truly a pleasure of mine to be here. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to me for mainly two reasons. You know, first and foremost, my commitment to the state of South Carolina. You know, I am a graduate of Clemson, as Martine said, and she was my advisor. So she really kind of scripted what my path through Clemson should look like. And I won't tell you how many years ago that was, but she's still my advisor today. And she takes that role very seriously, and we stay connected on what's going on currently in South Carolina, but also what's going on currently at Clemson to make sure that we're always in vogue as to what the new research and opportunities are. And then secondly, I've spent nearly 25 years in the medical device business, and mostly in the orthopedic trauma space, but I've had the opportunity to watch the industry evolve over those 25 years and gain a global perspective on what healthcare really needs to look like and what we need to do in that space. And I think we can agree that the industry has grown and changed significantly And we have seen some game-changing innovation over that time in orthopedics, in cardiology, in cell and gene therapies, and we've seen many, many more. But we've been able to help people live fuller, happier lives as a result of these technologies and solutions that have been introduced around the world. But it isn't just the products and the technologies that have changed. The global healthcare environment has changed as well. In the past, success meant having the greatest implant or introducing the very specific product that makes the difference. Today, innovation of devices will always be critical, but now it is only one piece of the overall puzzle to solving healthcare. We have to prove that our technologies and solutions add value through improved patient outcomes, quality patient experience, and all the while doing that, we have to reduce overall costs. This requires us to swiftly evolve our approach on how we bring our offerings to market and consider the many stakeholders that we work with other than just the surgeons and their patients. We need to rethink how we define innovation. As leaders in the life science industry, it's our responsibility to stay on top of the shifts in healthcare landscape so we can continue to bring effective, life-changing solutions to the patients around the world. And that needs to happen immediately, as there are still too many who lack access to life-saving care. A recent study showed that 5 billion people around the world lack access to what we see in this room as common surgery. What's worse, a lot of those patients and those people, their ailments are perfectly treatable. That's 2/3 of the world's population, which represents an urgent need and opportunity to reach out to the world's most vulnerable people and offer them solutions for surgical care to improve their lives. I bring up these points because I think it's important to keep a global perspective as we spend the next 45 minutes discussing how we can enhance our medical devices landscape right here in South Carolina. These global trends, demonstrating value, bringing total healthcare solutions, improving patient outcomes, and above all, helping patients have access to all the new innovations that are available. These are the specific opportunities that we have to consider, and these are specific opportunities that have a foundation in South Carolina. So when I look around the room, I'm reminded that we already have a foundation of a robust and growing life sciences industry. We have major research universities. We have over 400 life science organizations. And we have multiple nationally recognized healthcare providers just here in this state. We have representatives today from startup companies, and they're ready to build the future of medical devices around the world. And we've talked about talent development already today, but outside these walls, there's a pool of talent in our backyard that are not only medical professionals, they're engineers, scientists, business people, and more. With all of these talented individuals, these highly qualified institutions right here in South Carolina, we are uniquely poised to become a force in the life sciences industry. And we can do this not only on a local capacity or a national capacity, but let's think globally and how we can influence the healthcare of all the population around the world. I've always said that the healthcare community is actually very small. And the chances are that the work you are doing today is complementary to the person sitting next to you. So how do we take this and share our common goal of improving patient healthcare and to the extent where we can tap into this collective power? And how can we move this forward with a solid plan and dictate the extent to which we can be successful to overcome the challenges we see today? So to close, I would say we're in an enviable position. We have the foundation right here, what we need to do to continue the lives and to continue the lives of the patients who depend on us. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so with a great panel of experts that are going to help us understand what the medical device community needs and how we can continue to innovate, how we can continue to develop and find solutions to help those patients that are waiting for us. So it's now my pleasure to bring up Sean Regan and the rest of the panel, and we're going to spend a very exciting 45 minutes and discuss the future of medical devices.
This ain't a song for the broken-hearted. A silent prayer for faith departed.
Into cross stage.
Thanks. I don't know what to think about the walk-up song, Aaron. I realize that you picked these all out. I don't know what you're telling the whole crowd about this group up here, but we're excited to be here. My name is Sean Regan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called RhythmLink International. We're based in Columbia, South Carolina. We make medical devices, and we help connect patients to machines to record or elicit physiologic data. We've been around for about 16 years. We're born and bred here in Columbia, South Carolina, and we're actually, but along with that, we're actually a multinational company. So even though we're relatively small, there are a lot of things that we have done that a lot of these larger companies and experiences have run into at the same time. So what I want to do is sort of go down the list. We've already met IV. He has the most spectacular name in medical device, so I think it's great that you're here and that you're with us. Why don't we do this? Why don't we go down the line, have each of you introduce yourselves briefly, tell us who you are, who you work for, and a little bit about what you do. And in particular, I want to hear a little bit about, in your backgrounds, the experiences that you have outside of South Carolina and why that's important. And what we're going to talk about later as far as where South Carolina has strengths and where we have weaknesses and where we can improve. So take it away, Josh.
So I'm Josh Ridley. My name's not quite as cool as Ivy. I work for Zeus, where I do global business development. I've been with Zeus for 17 years. Started back when I had a little bit of hair, and I've kind of been in a number of different positions with Zeus. Zeus manufactures polymer components for a number of different industries, primarily med device. And I'm happy to say that these gentlemen on this stage are all my customer, so that's a good thing. At Zeus, I've been in sales and marketing. I've been in an engineering role, business development, market development, strategic marketing. Very much sort of a behind the scenes kind of a perspective into device development, be it at startup level or mid-sized firm or multinational OEM like Abbott and J&J and the like. Hopefully I can bring some thought to bear to that end.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Adam?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. Adam Kloneke. I'm with Abbott. Been with Abbott for 15 years now. I actually came to Abbott via St. Jude Medical. So Abbott acquired St. Jude Medical in January of 2017. So that's when I joined the Abbott family. I am on the operational side, and locally, I'm the site director of the Liberty, South Carolina location. So hopefully everyone got to see Tom this morning, right, and him talk about the journey at that site. I was not there. I look a little bit younger than Tom. I have not been there since he started that journey, but I've joined the site recently in the last couple years, and I've worked with them very closely over a number of years. I also oversee our Scottsdale, Arizona location, which does electronics and similar products. Products go into pacemakers, ICDs, neurostimulation products, and that type of active implantable device. So, of course, yeah, working with actually these two partners very, very closely, and there's a chain of life there that's very cool to follow that we'll see later on. But during the 15 years that I've been with Abbott, again, mostly on the operational side and really bringing these products to market, I've lived overseas in Malaysia, Belgium, Puerto Rico, throughout the U.S., maybe specifically for this topic in the Bay Area, and I've seen that development take place in the Bay Area and what that means. I oversaw operations for a little acquisition that St. Jude did called NanoStim, which is an implantable pacemaker that goes inside your heart. So definitely seeing a lot of different environments, and I'm very excited, though, to be in South Carolina and supporting what we do here locally, because we do have a lot of excellent things happening for sure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Ferry. I'm a native South Carolinian. Ferry is an Orangeburg, Charleston name, for those of you who don't know. Grew up in South Carolina, went to Clemson, of course, with my other two colleagues here. I've been with AVX for 35 years. AVX is a South Carolina company. It was started in Myrtle Beach back in the early 70s. We're still a South Carolina company. Headquarters are in Fountain Inn, which is where I'm based now. We are now about a $2 billion company with 25 or 30 plants, 15,000 employees around the world. An important part of our business is servicing the medical device industry. That's the part of it that I'm responsible for. We make capacitors and filters, one of my biggest customers here. So we're proud to be associated with that, the circle of life that Adam was talking about. We buy Teflon precision tubing from Zeus that go into our medical grade capacitors that end up on hybrid circuits that his plants make, that end up in pacemakers, defibrillators, neuromodulation devices, heart monitors that help millions of people around the world extend life, save lives, and improve their quality of life every day. So it's pretty cool for me to be in this industry.
Great, thanks. I think where we'll start off, we'll sort of do a compliment sandwich for South Carolina and probably go with some of the things that you have seen that South Carolina does really well related to medical devices, especially with your travels and with these large organizations that you've worked with. So why don't we start there? Does anybody in their travels really, when they think about South Carolina, have a few things that jump out at them that makes this place special in related to that topic?
Yeah, I can certainly jump in. I was listening earlier this morning when we were talking about the constellation effect, and I kept thinking about this great constellation that has been very powerful for us here in South Carolina, and that's having certainly automotive in the area, having aerospace, and then medical devices. And really that type of knowledge to bring those types of product to market is definitely very well connected, and it's a lot of similar thought process between those two. And we've had some very successful hires from those companies, hopefully not leaving holes that we just talked about in those companies. Hopefully those people were joining us because they were just looking for a transition to a different industry or moving throughout the state, and not for any other reason. But that constellation works really, really well for us, and that exists right here in South Carolina, and we continue to leverage that. That's not always the case in every other space, in every other region, and sometimes you see a constellation come together like that does just kind of start gaining momentum. I feel like we're gaining momentum in that space, and I feel like we're able to leverage that very, very well.
So from my perspective, living in the Greenville area now, I've seen a tremendous change, having gone to Clemson many years ago. Greenville was a place you just didn't go, and now it's a place we have no trouble attracting people to come and live in the Greenville area. It's a delightful place to live, lots of restaurants and attractions, good schools, and all of those things that you need to attract high-tech companies. So the Greenville area, the Midlands, and the Charleston area have become areas where it's possible to attract high-tech companies, and I think we've been extremely successful in that area. I have concerns about some of the other areas of the state. I was encouraged to hear Chairman White talk about education initiatives in the rest of the state. As Noah said, I think in the prior panel discussion, we no longer really have a brain drain here. I think we've become a net importer of brain power in South Carolina to a very large extent. We need to replace that brain power with people from our own state. We need to spend more money, maybe on education, but we certainly need to spend the money more wisely, especially in underserved areas. I had the distinct pleasure last year after this conference, I connected with someone who put me in touch with the High School for the Medical Professions in Orangeburg, my hometown. I would encourage any of you to go there and see what they do. I think of them often. If I watch the news too much, I sort of start losing my faith in human nature, but then I think about the faculty and kids in that school and I feel much better about things. So that's the kind of thing I think we're doing well. It's a charter school. Maybe we won't get into a discussion about charter versus public schools, but what they're doing well, and we need more of that in this state.
I mean, I think living outside of the state also, and you know, it's very, you know, I live outside of Philadelphia, and the amount of Clemson license plates and Gamecock license plates that I see, either my son or daughter go to these schools, or it's you know, a proud alumni. I think the brand of Clemson schools is actually doing quite well these days. And I think it's primarily due to some of the unique talents that the students have and some of the people that are coming out of the programs here. I think when you think about devices or you think about life sciences, you think about the scientists that are actually working on the products, the biomaterial scientists or what have you. But I think some of the other very valuable engineering that is coming to play even more in J&J is the packaging science. Dealing with how do you create sustainable products? How do you create sterile products that can travel and have good shelf life? And I think, you know, the work that we do to develop those unique specialties in the state to make the, you know, the talent here that much more desirable, I think is continuing to grow. So I think it's not only the brand that we create, but it's also the unique talents that come behind it.
I might add one more thing that I see that I think is powerful, and maybe jumping in on what you were sharing, Ivy, is that there's definitely a huge amount of pride in the region, and that pride keeps people here, and that means I don't see the brain drain. Yeah, I see an import of talent, which is really, really neat, and it's great that, certainly I'm in the upstate, so in Greenville, it's great that city has gone through a transformation over the years. I've certainly traveled there for 15 years now. And it's a great city to be in. It's a fantastic place to be, and it brings in talent. And when we bring, you know, potential new candidates from outside the state, from many other universities, they love it. They're happy to move here, happy to join a very proud organization. And so we've been able to attract a lot of people. Now we certainly hope that then to the education side that we're leveraging more of the talent within the state, and that we're giving jobs to those folks who are then coming through the local system. That would be really, really neat. And it does certainly happen. Quite a lot. So we have a lot of people who are proud, who are local to the region, and we're able to attract talent from outside the region for sure. And that is accelerating for us. That's what we see.
Sean, one of the things that, specifically from Zeus's perspective, that we've started to notice within the state, and certainly one of the attractions to SCbio for Zeus has been a recognition of the importance of bringing folks from industry and from, you know, clinical settings to the table when you start to talk about device development. Oftentimes, as a component supplier, Zeus isn't necessarily thought of in the early stages of, you know, a new design or a concept. But believe it or not, we have some really smart people at Zeus, and you know, it's important for us to be able to tap into, you know, clinicians who are going to be ultimately using the device, and kind of learn from them what some of the unmet needs are, what some of the challenges are, apart from just sort of having it filtered through maybe a device engineer or biomedical engineer at one of the big, you know, OEMs. Not to say that opinion and sort of perspective isn't important, but all that to say, I think that the state as a whole is doing a better job of bringing industry and, you know, the clinical world together when you start to talk about device development, whether it be, you know, altogether new or, you know, an iterative improvement, incremental improvement. And I see it in the upstate, I see it in Columbia, and certainly see it down here. And that's something that we're really hoping to tap into with SCbio. It's gradually been kind of making some improvements since the inception of the organization, and hopefully we'll continue to do that.
So on that theme, I think that everyone on the panel would agree that that translational science piece, that getting clinicians, scientists, engineers together is a huge component to successful medical device development. And it's a big deal, and having that is really beneficial, and that there are pieces of that. Does anyone have any thoughts on where we could do even a better job, or where we could start integrating some of this from past experiences or experiences in other states, organizations, networks?
I mean, I think, what I've seen work in the past, and we used to do this a lot. We have a Swiss R&D facility, and we actually put our engineers and scientists actually in the hospital. And I know Clemson is actually doing this with the Patewood Center, but what you see is you get all the stakeholders involved. It's not just the surgeons, but you actually get the nurses, and you get the people that are actually treating that patient, and you get the engineers get to watch and learn in real time. So putting the engineers on site and the scientists on site that are working on these therapies, and actually hand in hand with the nurses and the surgeons and the doctors. We do a lot even with rheumatologists or hospitalists that don't see the patients on a routine basis, but they are in part of that patient care pathway. And I think following that from the beginning to the end and following that patient all along continues to be one of those total solutions that we have to figure out the opportunity for, because ultimately the reimbursement for our devices or our therapies is only a small portion of what healthcare is actually paying for. There's a whole lot of environment in that patient care pathway that we can't necessarily affect with a device. So we have to be able to provide those solutions from beginning to end, and immersing our team in that environment is only going to help us uncover where we can bring that value. So I think it's actually, that partnership all along the way makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking for ABX, one of our research scientists, Dr. Craig Neese, is here with me. And we're working on several initiatives for new kinds of medical components that we might be able to make. And we're not having any trouble at all finding people who are willing and happy to work with us, whether it's a health system or a university. So I can't think of anything that could improve on that, because we found plenty of people who are more than happy and eager to work with us on new device development.
Maybe I may take this in a slightly different direction. I work in a space where we do not make the end product, so we're making components that go into end products, and certainly we're using components that go into end products. And so I think maybe we'll talk later about what piece of R&D are we engaged in? Are we engaged in the development of the final product that needs to go into the patient, right, in the MedTech space? In which case, yes, you got to have the clinical aspects, tying that together and accelerating that piece of the development cycle for a medical device. But there's a huge other world of medical device development that is all of the suppliers, whether they're vertically integrated or not, that need to feed into this. And I think that space, it doesn't need the clinicians or the teams on site who are trained to that aspect of the medical device product, because then you have your clinical groups maybe elsewhere where there's larger, I think like in California, Minnesota, large bases of people trained to deliver products to market in that space. But you absolutely need your engineers working on, if it could be a capacitor or anything like that, an electronic, they need to understand where these products are going so they respect their jobs. But it's also the easiest cultural sell in our business. It's so much fun to talk about the patient impact, so much fun to being in patients, so much fun to go into an implant and see how the products are used and see these technologies change lives. It brings you right back to, playing video games as a kid and just seeing how an electronic device can transform someone's life. And I think that's where we need, you got to foster that space quite a lot. You need to encourage organizations to work with you. You need to encourage hospitals to open their doors. You need to encourage universities to engage with these devices and play with them in their labs, if in any way, because that's the fun part of what we do, even if we don't get to play with the end finished good. Certainly, that's in my space. So I think it is a powerful tool from that perspective.
One of the things that over the years I've noticed from a deficiency standpoint, and I don't mean it necessarily in a negative connotation, and I may have altogether missed the point that I'm about to make, so if that's the case, someone just throw something at me. Oftentimes, again, as a component supplier, we have entrepreneurial clinicians that will approach us, startup companies who are looking for someone to do some light subassembly or design work and then some light assembly for them. At Zeus, we are limited to a certain extent by design as far as the length to which we will go with respect to manufacturing a device. And understandably, there are a number of companies in the state whose specialty it is to manufacture devices for a particular indication or field of use. But it seems to me, and again, maybe I've missed it, but if you look at some of the hotbeds in some of the ecosystems that exist in, let's say, the Bay Area or Minneapolis or Boston or Miami in its heyday, a true kind of generic contract manufacturer. I don't know that one exists in South Carolina. If it does, again, I'd like to meet you because someone that can take a design, be it in neuromod or be it in GI endoscopy, and build a device. I've not come across anyone within the state. In some cases, and some people in this room, I've worked with you, that's been a missing link with respect to the entire sort of supply chain or value chain. There's one not too far up the road in Charlotte that I can think of, but as far as proximity within the state, I feel like that's an opportunity for the state.
Right, so let's talk about more opportunities, not call them necessarily deficiencies or problems. But where are they? Where are those deficiencies and where can we get better? What do you want to see come into South Carolina to help you?
So I know we talked a lot before today, talking about getting organized, and I've heard that comment a lot, being organized, being focused, right? It's a competitive world out there. I've operated in spaces in Malaysia and Bay Area, Minnesota, Belgium. It's a very competitive world, right? So we have to be focused on what we want to achieve. So thinking about this topic, accelerating medical device development in South Carolina, on what space do we mean about that? And I think we really need to be focused in what that means. So for me, I think that there's a couple phases to medical device development. There's that initial stage where you need those VCs. Where's our VC in the room? VC there. So you need your VCs. You need folks trained in the clinical aspects of these products. You need talent that is moving around in that space. And I lived in the Bay Area for a while, and that's what's happening there. And it is a very different environment when you work there. Do we want to compete with that? Or is there that second phase of medical device development that is that next stage of acceleration, which could be that contract manufacturer you're talking about, or could be a vertically integrated manufacturer where you need a safe place from an IP perspective. You need to grow with the right talent. You need to have be able to do it in a financially sustainable way. It needs to be probably close to the R&D hub. So it's pretty easy to get here actually from anywhere in the U.S. and certainly these major cities. Is that the place we want to focus on and really drive R&D, that piece of R&D, because it will have legs, it will spread into different areas and components and drive further R&D in those spaces. I think it's a powerful place to be. And I look around the U.S. and I think there's not a lot of spaces, there's not a lot of other areas focused on that. There's a lot of areas focused on the total, those two pieces of the R&D element, like Minnesota, like California, but they are expensive and they don't want to do that second piece. So a lot of companies look for that second piece, but they don't want to go too far away from home. They're not yet ready for overseas manufacturing. So I think that's absolutely an opportunity. So to do that, then we define what type of talent we need in that space. And there's a lot of different types of talent that you need there, and you can really focus on developing those folks first and really accelerate the growth that we would want here.
Yeah, when we had our prep call, we talked about that a little bit, and one of the observations I made was that there is a missing link there between the people who have the IP and do the initial invention and the people who actually end up taking it to market. And in the middle, there's people tinkering around on benches with some electronics and trying to make something work. They sell the company to somebody like Abbott, who then goes in and corrects all their mistakes and actually takes the product to market. But in the middle there, I think we talked a little bit about this. There's a crying need in this country for people who understand FDA regulations as they apply to medical devices. There's a crying need for people who understand statistical process control better, manufacturing techniques better, so that when they're in that second phase, they don't make all these mistakes that their buyer has to spend tens of millions of dollars in correcting. We see that all the time as a component supplier. We supply to people usually in the third phase, because in the second phase, they're buying the cheapest capacitors they can get their hands on, which turns out to not be really the smart thing to do. So that was something I pointed out as a need. If we could find a way to fill that middle niche there and develop companies that are taking something from concept to the first stage of production in a responsible manner, that's a big gap in this country.
And you mentioned opportunities. And I think, just the regulations, in fact, are a very shrinking window, because I think today most startups will try to do their first in humans in Europe to get get ready to start their 510K or PMA submissions in the US. Well, with the new MDR regulations that's coming into Europe, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to put a device in humans that doesn't have a predicate that actually has some kind of evidence behind it to show that it's safe. So now you have to figure out what's your strategy, what's your clinical pathway, what's your regulatory pathway to get products to market. So that expertise in developing the statistical modeling, the clinical evidence generation, the ability to understand the rules, whether they're in the US or in Europe or even in the individual countries of Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, where you might have opportunities to get first in human. This is some of the challenges that are going to be ahead of us in the next 18 months to 2 years. The MDR takes place, has to be in effect in 2020. So any new device developed after mid next year is going to be subject to these new regulations. So it's a big opportunity to get some expertise for translational development. Ideas to products, getting those products into clinics and surgeons' hands is going to be the next translation that's going to be the challenge ahead of us. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to develop expertise in that area.
And I think in my experience, some of the more specialized sort of boutique contract manufacturers have sort of full service, capability to an extent with respect to design, and can kind of walk you through the entire process, be it, regulatory support and, consultation, certainly design service and all that kind of stuff. But I think there is an entity that just feels like, or is certainly missing in the state that could add some value from that regard, from that perspective.
Yeah, just from my point of view and our firm point of view, some of the areas that we would love to see some things being shored up. We're no longer a startup. We're no longer really a small company. We're in that sort of phase where we're undergoing a lot of growth. And we're at a point where we're learning how to do IP commercialization, and it's been a big part of what it is that we want to do going forward. But there's no one out there to teach us to do that. There's just not a lot of places to go where you learn it. So you go and you do it yourself and you kind of figure it out. For us, same thing with R&D and getting access to clinicians. We had talked about how getting that translational science piece and getting in front of clinicians, nurses, doctors to find out how can we take their ideas and turn them into products. And that's gotten, I think, significantly better over the past 5 years. I've been involved with SCbio for a long time now. It's my second stint on the board, and one of the things that what we started with very early on was just getting the word out about what is going on in South Carolina. And I think we're continuing to do that. As a state, we feel more confident what it is that we can do, and those connections are still being made. And from my point of view, I think that that's one of the things that's most important. Continue to make those connections between all these different companies, all these different groups. And that's really should be a focus going forward, because all of this stuff is growing, and it's getting there, and it's accelerating. The flywheel is getting pushed and spinned around. And I think you just need to continue to have it be there. But from a smaller company's perspective, IP commercialization and getting that clinical piece to how we can really get in front of clinicians and do the things that we do well for them. So I had to at least say something up here besides asking specific questions. What about, we talked a little bit about education. what would you like to see? I know that one of our big issues is that when you bring students in either as interns or you're hiring students right out of school, design control, engineering practices, we talked a little bit about FDA, those are some of the things that we end up having to train everybody all the time on those because they simply just aren't a part of the curriculum. Are there other examples with design control, or you have other ideas regarding some of the nuts and bolts, the tactical pieces of taking ideas from ideas through commercialization?
Yeah, so I think that's a super important place to operate in. Going back earlier, we said we attract a lot of people from outside the state to move here. But we also attract a lot of folks who are very technically capable, but not yet trained in that space. So they're coming here thinking they're entering an environment where, everyone knows medical device development and they can step right in. But the fact is, well, we're growing here too. So we have a lot of individuals from within the state learning these new spaces. So we've got biotech programs, like bioengineering programs that are expanding. But as you onboard a new bioengineer, a lot of times they don't know how to execute and go through that pathway. And so you have to send them somewhere. I often find looking here, I'm often sending people outside the state, or I'm sending them to other company locations. I don't see any reason why we don't have more training within the state. We certainly have enough of us interested in this space to talk about design controls, process controls, and that entire cadence of how you take a product end to end or even manage within that system. And so it seems like a great opportunity to have someone, I don't know if that's a university, I don't know if that's SCbio, I don't know who that is, bring that training here more regularly, get it out there, make sure everyone knows about it, and make sure we actually are sending individuals to that. I send a lot of people outside the state for that type of training. And I don't think I have to. Maybe I'm learning about the state more and more. Again, it's been a good couple years. I've got more to learn, but maybe that does exist here, and maybe it just needs to be accelerated.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Adam said. In fact, I think I said on our call, AVX has invested in Clemson's automobile program just off 85. I think we've got some endowments there. But if one of the universities or schools would come up with a program on change in design control and SPC, I would personally lobby to fund that because it is a crying need, not just for us, but for everybody in the industry.
And just to add on that, I know we might be harping on quality here, but I think the understanding of risk analysis and the full context of how the devices are used and what the effects are and those hazard analyses, I think rolling that into either the statistical processes or how we resolve some of those issues in design rounds and mitigations, I think is something that we end up doing a lot of on-the-job training for. I think that today there's a lot of programs that go from idea to commercialization, and they talk about the design loops and the IP process and what that takes to do the market assessments. But at the same time, how do you sit down and do you work on the safety factors and the risk mitigation and those risk analysis? I think is a big part of getting it into that final verification and validation loop. So just another nuance to add to those creative inquiries.
Not to steal the thunder of one of the upcoming panels, but one of the things we haven't talked about is integrating or having larger companies and smaller companies working together and where different partnerships can blossom. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on where you've seen that work well in your organizations and how SCbio or South Carolina can take advantage of those situations?
And I don't know if Representative White is still here, but he said government is slow. I would have to say that I think big companies rival that speed. Because I think one of the things, because of some of the procedures and processes involved in large companies, the ability to be quick and make quick decisions and do quick design loops at a small company is much more, that they're much more assertive in being able to do. So I think the idea generation and then actually working with a smaller company to see it through to that point, I think works well. And we've done it on a couple of occasions. We actually also employ the J&J Innovation Centers and local development offices where they go out and work with smaller incubators and get them to a point where they can sit down and say a translational opportunity exists. So I think, understanding the problem to solve and then partnering together with smaller companies that have that expertise, I think is also a very huge innovation vehicle for larger companies.
Yeah, Josh, was it you who mentioned sometimes we don't know all the companies that are right here in the state and that we can work with someone right here. We don't need to fly to California. Was that you? Or was that? It was on the phone.
It wasn't
so.
me. You read my mind. So. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, I heard it maybe in the background during our pre-panel preparation call. But so scale. We're talking about scale then and working with smaller companies. So who is a smaller company? So Abbott's a $30 billion company. So we might work with a very large yet smaller company, and then that company might work with then someone even smaller. So you start getting into this tentacle effect. But in the region, certainly we want to work with as many local companies as possible. Even at a large company, yes, speed actually is a challenge for sure. But also we don't have all the skill sets that we need. For instance, we're investing in heavy automation right now. So that gets into the talent piece, but it also gets into who could develop that automation. And we're leveraging a company right next door in Pickens County who just moved there, JR Automation, to do some of our work for us. And so that network starts to spread out. And I think the more we understand who's out there and their capabilities, of course, the more we're going to work locally with those organizations for the local things that we do. It might not be for that medical device first product development, but it certainly will be all of the other tentacles that come across that. And we want to do that more because that's actually going to help us move faster. It is very hard to then constantly call back to California because we have one of our home bases there and we have to wait for the time zones to work or if we're buying from somewhere else. So we want to actually invest locally and keep building that 2.9x multiplier effect through the state because that's actually good for both sides.
Great.
We just real quickly, we do some work with a translational research group out in California, and I'm out there far too often, although my wife might say not often enough. But I mean, it is it's obviously commonsensical that if there is an entity that exists in South Carolina, logistically for Zeus and for myself, it'd be a lot easier to work with that group. I think SCbio is doing a fantastic job from what I've seen, especially in the last couple of years, starting to catalog some of those resources and avail those of its members and other groups within the state so that we can tap into those resources and keep it at home as much as we can, to the extent that we don't have to go outside of the state for a particular piece of technology or service or whatever it may be. So,
Sure. We're getting close to wrapping it up. So, and I'd like to try to get to the audience in case there's any questions out there. But before we do that, is there a takeaway from one or all of you? One of the things that you'd like to see South Carolina focus on to help your organizations?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there on one of the most common themes, of course, all day is talent, without a doubt. It's talent and how we tap into that. We as a company are striving to do better to tap into talent. We're 9 miles from Clemson, so we want to engage there stronger, but we also want to see the side or the alternate side of that and that engagement with the companies. We are actually open, and we need to figure out how to figure out how to do that. I know you guys have some incredible stories about interns. That's phenomenal. So we certainly take inspiration from that. But on top of that, there's also the next level of technical understanding and definitely building up the technical talent to work with automation, to get there, to be on the front line, and to ensure the quality of the products. Definitely need a very talented workforce, and all the organizations, all of the technical schools throughout the region are definitely stepping it up. I know Tom had to leave because he's going to a Tri-County Tech board meeting to work with them to help continue to build up their program for their technicians. You need all levels for your quality to work in your system. You need that operator to be very proficient in what they do and focus on quality. You need technicians that are good, engineers who are excellent, managers who are excellent. So the more we double down in that space, I think we'll continue to accelerate and continue to win.
Yeah, I would echo that. And to go back to something I said earlier, the biggest deficiency I see is that we need to move the needle on the education piece, the primary education piece. We have great tech schools, we have great universities, but in some parts of the state, we definitely have unserved needs that we need to do a better job of. So that's my biggest takeaway.
Great. Any other takeaways?
I mean, I think the only thing that I would probably add to that is that, you know, we see devices today as very stagnant. And I think as far as they're applied at the time of surgery and they're left in, they do their job, and then the patient heals. I think moving forward, the devices are going to have to be much more smart or much more intelligent and adaptable to responses. So our artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these new technologies that are starting to come to the forefront, they're going to have to be combined with our devices of today. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding how we continue to go along that evolutionary path and those skill sets and being able to focus on that is going to be something very interesting down the road.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments from the audience? There has to be at least one question out here.
Right there in front.
Microphone's coming.
Is it on? Yeah, I recently moved from Indiana, and in the state of Indiana, there was a lot of consternation due to the medical device industry, from the medical device industry in Indiana about the impact of the medical device tax. And I know we've got this moratorium in place until the end of 2020. And much of that consternation was uncertainty around, you know, how medical device industry is going to respond to that. How do you make decisions about investment? How do you mitigate the impact of that tax? And how might that ultimately impact, in the case of Indiana, in the case of South Carolina, how might that impact manufacturing decisions in South Carolina? Thanks.
Yeah.
You're
I have
talking
opinions
about
on
the
the medical-
Affordable Care Act that added a tax on medical devices? Okay. Well,
I've got opinions on the
Go
medical
ahead.
device tax, but I'd like to hear from the panel first.
Well, I'll tell you what some of our customers told us when we asked the question. They said they don't like any additional tax, but the hope was that the act would bring more people, give more people access to health care and devices, so there should be an offset. At least that was the politically correct statement we got from our major customers at the time. I don't have any opinion otherwise.
I'll add that, you know, any tax like that certainly is a financial burden, and a company has to figure out how to manage that burden. So it does drive you to shift your decision making, and I think it's unhealthy to make that kind of decision and apply that to a specific group. So certainly everyone had to look at how the numbers roll up and see what we do about that, and I think that drives you to increase your risk, because then you focus just on cost, and it's not about cost, it's about delivering high quality products to meet the patient needs. And so I think it really drives, is just against what we're trying to do in medical devices. And so I think that was certainly hard, and definitely the moratorium, it really helps not to be under that pressure anymore and not have to think about that, because then quality and the patient always come first. We don't have to add that extra nugget to the line item. So it does affect things. It's real. It's a real impact.
And I think the other thing that it creates is very short-term thinking. I think what you do is you automatically take the risk out of your strategy, which is all going to be your long-term aspiration. And you deliver you focus on what you have to deliver near term and make sure you don't miss those launch dates. So any innovation or any sales channel or any marketing strategy, everything's near term and you sacrifice the long term. So all of a sudden, you see very different strategies coming from companies, which I think as we think about where technology is going, it's not a very healthy path.
Great, thanks. I think that's it for our time up here. But hold on.
I had a question.
Oh, sorry.
If we have a minute for
Yeah,
one
sure,
more.
go for it.
So I'm Tiffany Wilson. I'm the CEO of the Global Center for Medical Innovation in Atlanta. I found this an incredibly fascinating conversation, because what you described through the majority of the panel, we've been building for the past 6 years in Atlanta to serve the Southeast United States. And so 2 questions. One, is there an appetite at the state government and industry level to fund not only the investment in the infrastructure and building that expertise, but recognizing the considerable cost on an annualized basis to serve a rather small market. And two, I'm kind of picking up on a theme about a aversion to or lack of willingness to collaborate across state lines to further life science startups in South Carolina. So if you could just share your insight on that.
Yeah, I will jump in for sure. So second question first, because that's just fresh in my mind, but I'm definitely coming back to companies investing in universities and that type of topic. But I see coming outside the state, the competition should absolutely not be up and down the I-85 corridor. The competition is elsewhere. So we need to connect that link and work together. And I think that's far more powerful. It's not a far drive. I drive from Atlanta to Liberty, South Carolina all the time. It is not bad for me. We have operations in Atlanta as well. So I think that it's important to recognize competitions elsewhere and actually cross those state lines. And so we do that quite regularly. We actually share staff even between those locations. Then to the first question about investing, so MedTech generally, everyone looks at it and says, wow, it's high margin, but it's like drugs where you got to put huge investment in up front to then recoup that development. And these companies are not big. They are still pretty small when you look at the overall scale. So it is hard to then spread out that dollars everywhere, every university in every region within which we operate to make an impact. And so that's where I believe we operate and do our core clinical work and development work maybe in certain regions and invest there in that specific aspect. And in the region where we are based and the type of operation we do there, we want to invest in what that area needs. So certainly for us and what we do at our site in South Carolina, we want to engage in the local universities and build up the type of talent I was describing, and that's where we are putting our money where our mouth is and trying to figure out how we bring on board interns or how we engage with that university, how we do training together, how we change that curriculum, how we just have that open dialogue and figure out how to do that. And so I'm trying to figure that out actively because I think that is an important part, but it's not going to be every single aspect of medical device development. For us, it's going to be the one that benefits us too. Anyone else?
I mean, the only thing that I would add to that is that the patients we intend to serve are a global population. So if we want to reduce or limit our innovation potential, then shame on us. I think we have to be able to expand our horizons to treat the environments globally that everybody's facing. So we have to be open to all comers, all ideas, all innovations, and being able to develop them to the best of our abilities, wherever that may be. But I think as far as benefiting South Carolina, I think honing in on some certain skills could benefit everybody, not just South Carolinians, but our impact around the world.
Other questions? Yeah, I think we have. I think we have to. I think we're out of time. So, sorry. We've gone to 00 on the shot clock like 5 times. So, I'm doing my best here. All right. So, thank you everyone for this panel. Thank the panel for being up here and sharing your insights with us. And give them a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.